Hi, this is Alessio. Hope you're well. In this video, we're going to take a look at a very important and a potentially dangerous pattern that is forming right now, as you can see here on this chart. I'm going to explain to you what this pattern you're seeing here means and on what chart it's forming and what the consequences could be for the stock markets and also potentially Bitcoin as well. Join me. Alright guys, welcome back. Before we start, I just want to thank Masterworks for sponsoring this video. And by the way, as I mentioned before, any money we get from sponsors will be donated to charity. Alright guys, so in this video I want to talk to you briefly about an important chart pattern that's happening right now, as you can see here, and what the potential meaning and the consequences of this pattern could be for the stock markets and also potentially Bitcoin as well. I'll mention Bitcoin briefly at the end of this video. So let's talk about this important chart you're seeing here and the pattern that's forming here on this chart. What you're seeing here is the chart of XMI, or the NYC Major Market Index. Now, if you've never heard of XMI before, well, don't worry, because it's not a well-known market or chart. You see, according to Robert Prechter and Elliott Wave International, they said the NYC Arca Major Market Index, or XMI, is a price-weighted index of 20 blue-chip stocks that represent major U.S. industrial companies. So according to Robert Prechter, back in the day, this index was popular among analysts. It is not discussed as much now, which is one reason we keep an eye on it. So that's actually a very good reason to keep an eye on this chart, because it seems the majority of folks out there, the majority of people, are not really paying attention to what's happening on this chart. So this is the weekly chart of XMI, as you can see here, going back to 2020. And what's very interesting is, notice after that major rally from March 2020, after the crash of 2020, we saw a major rally, as you can see here. And then this rally came to a stall, came to a halt, essentially back in the spring or summer of last year in 2021. And really from then on, all it's been doing for the last several months, it's been in a sideways consolidation pattern in this, as you can see here, in this large expanding triangular formation that you can see here. Now this pattern you're seeing here, it's often referred to as an expanding triangle or a megaphone pattern because it looks a bit like a megaphone, as you can see here. Also, it's often referred to as an expanding diagonal, but actually I quite like the name that Robert Prechter uses for this pattern, which is called the jaws of life. By the way, in case you're wondering, this has nothing to do with Jaws, you know, that shark in the movie. But as I'm sure you probably know, jaws of life is actually a tool that is used by a lot of firefighters, as you can see here. Firefighters use this tool to essentially help them break open things. For example, breaking open into a car door. So as you can see here, this pattern, the reason why Robert Prechter calls it the jaws of life, because it does kind of resemble that kind of jaws of life tool that firefighters use. So let's take a look at this pattern. As you can see here, price, all it's been doing is been going up and down sideways, you can see here, but also in a broadening pattern, as you can see here, in this kind of expanding triangular formation, or this jaws of life pattern, as Robert Prechter calls it. And I think this pattern could be very important for us in the next several months of this year. In fact, this pattern could give us an early warning of a potential continuation of a bull market or a potential bear market, depending on what it does in the next few weeks and months. I'll explain this to you in a few minutes. By the way, since we're talking about the stock markets, did you know there's one market which has outpaced the S&P 500 total return by 164% from 1995 to 2021? And in case you're wondering what that market is, it is contemporary art prices. Let me repeat that point because it's quite important. Contemporary art prices have outpaced the S&P 500 total return by 164% from 1995 to 2021. By the way, I'm no art expert, but when I was younger, I was always mesmerized and dazzled by a famous painting by Salvador Dali. It's called The Persistence of Memory, and that's been one of my favorite paintings of all time. So I hope you'll allow me just a few minutes to talk to you about our sponsor, Masterworks, because this is where they come in. And as I mentioned before, any money we get from sponsors will be donated to charity. Let me just begin by telling you a little bit about who Masterworks are. Masterworks was founded in 2017 by a top 100 art collector and tech entrepreneurs who have founded companies valued at over $1 billion. With over 75 years of art buying experience, Masterworks are one of the largest buyers in the art market today. To date, 325,000 people have signed up and they're looking to grow next year. Their total wealth held in art is estimated to be worth $1.7 trillion, and Deloitte projects it to grow $900 billion by 2026. Masterworks is already valued at over $1 billion. Two-thirds of billionaire collectors allocate between 10% and 30% of their overall portfolio to art. Now, Masterworks has emerged as the only platform taking billionaire art collectors head on and lets you access their exclusive investments. Simply put, you can now invest in the very same art they do by names like Banksy, Monet, Basquiat, and other iconic artists for just a fraction of what they pay to purchase. Masterworks knows what they're doing when it comes to selling art. In fact, they returned 32% to their investors in 2020 and 31% in 2021. Getting started with Masterworks is super easy. It takes just a few clicks. You visit their website, create an account, browse their artwork, and you can diversify your portfolio with one of the most stable assets around. If you don't want to wait until they find a buyer, Masterworks also offers a secondary market on their website where you can sell your shares to another member, similar to how you would sell your stock like Apple or Tesla on an app like Robinhood. The stock market has been wild recently. In fact, a lot of top equity firms are projecting real returns of 5% or less, and Morningstar is even predicting negative growth. The bottom line is the majority of wealth managers are saying it's quite important you diversify your portfolio. As I'm sure you know, when it comes to investing, it's quite important to know how to diversify between, for example, stock markets, individual stocks, precious metals and crypto, and in this case also contemporary artwork. So now with Masterworks, you can get set up with just a few clicks. Simply go to the link in the description, which takes you to their website, sign up, create an account, and then browse their paintings. You can then diversify your portfolio with fine art, and this helps support our charities as well. So go ahead and check it out. And as I'm sure you know, with any investment, nothing is risk-free, so decide responsibly. I want to thank Masterworks for sponsoring this video and allowing us the opportunity to help our charities. Alright guys, thank you very much indeed for listening to that section of the video. Let's get back to our chart here on XMI. So as I was saying at the start of this video, what happens on this chart of the NYSE Major Market Index, or XMI, could have a major impact and consequences for both the stock markets and also potentially Bitcoin, depending on how this pattern evolves in the next few weeks and months. You see guys, as you can see here, this pattern has been stuck in this triangular formation, this expanding triangular formation, or jaws of life pattern. The price has been going up and down within this pattern for the last several months, and it hasn't actually broken out yet of this pattern. As you can see here, XMI is still between the rising trend line here, the upper red line you can see right there, and the lower red line, the lower declining trend line you can see on that chart. We're stuck in this holding pattern, to use aviation terms, and the fact is we still don't know, and I have to tell you, I don't know from which direction this pattern wants to break from. For example, the pattern could resolve itself by breaking to the upper side of this pattern or break down below the lower part of this pattern. Again, I don't know from which side of this pattern this particular market XMI is going to break from. But essentially, the way to interpret this chart is like this. Depending on which direction price breaks from can give us a big clue as to what may happen next. For example, if XMI was to break from the upper side of that pattern, this expanding diagonal pattern, this jaws of life pattern, that could be a potentially bullish sign for the stock markets in the next several months going to the end of this year. However, if this pattern resolves itself to the downside, for example, if, and I say if, XMI were to break below this pattern, and also if it were to break below this support level at the 2020 highs and the 200 moving average on the weekly time frame, you can see the green line there. If price were to break below both of those, that potentially could be a very bearish sign for the stock markets in the next several months ahead, going to the end of this year. Let me just give you an example of this. Robert Prechter mentions this particular example here on the Dow. For example, this is a pattern that formed on the Dow over a long period of time, as you can see here. And again, notice we have a jaws of life pattern, or again, an expanding triangle. And you can see what happened next. The stock market, the Dow in this case, broke above the upper part of this particular pattern. It broke above the rising part of that pattern, the upper part, the jaws of life pattern. And that was actually a very bullish sign. It was a bullish breakout, and that led to further gains in the stock market in the long term. So as you can see here, a breakout to the upper part of this pattern is a potentially bullish sign for the markets if that actually plays out. As I mentioned before, if XMI manages to break out to the upper part of this pattern, for example, if it manages to break out above that rising trend line, that red line you see right there, for example, a move and a close above 3255 to 3276 could likely be a very bullish sign for the stock markets, not just XMI, but also potentially the S&P and the Dow as well. And yes, a potentially bullish impact on Bitcoin and crypto as well. By the way, if XMI did manage to break out to the upper part of this pattern, it has to also stay above support. Support would have to be at 3,220. So in other words, if XMI were to be able to break out above 3,255 to 3,276, if that happens, then price has to stay above and remain above 3,220 to about 3,200 to keep the bulls in control and to see further upside momentum in the stock markets. Because if it suddenly drops back down again, for example, if it drops back down below support, below 3,200 to 3,220 after the breakout, then no, that would be a false breakout and a potential bull trap. So what I'm saying is, if XMI did manage to break above this pattern, this expanding triangle formation or jaws of life pattern, it has to stay also above 3,200 to keep the bullish momentum going and to avoid a false breakout and a potential bull trap. However, if XMI were to break down below this pattern, as you can see here, if XMI were to break below this chart pattern, let's say, for example, XMI did this. Again, hypothetically, let's say XMI broke below the lower part, the declining red line you can see right there. Let's say it broke below it, and let's say it also broke below support at the 2020 highs you can see right there. That is the 2020 weekly closing highs at about 2840 on the chart there. So let's say the S&P also breaks below that as well, and let's say, for example, we continue to move below the 200 weekly average, the green line you see on my chart as well. So in a nutshell, if XMI were to break below all three levels, again, the lower part of that pattern, the expanding triangle formation, and support the 2020 highs, and support the 200 weekly average, the green line on my chart. So if it breaks all three and move and it close below 2840 and 2800, could potentially be a very bearish sign for the stock markets, the S&P and the Dow. And yes, potentially Bitcoin as well. And if that happens, that is a likely warning, an early warning of a potential bear market, a multi-month, multi-year bear market in the stock markets. Now, I should tell you this, guys, I'm not expecting a bear market to start early this year. As I mentioned before, I think a bear market to start in the early part of this year, I think is unlikely. I think that a bear market could start potentially in the next 12 to 18 months, but not so early in the year. However, I should say this, even if XMI did break down and broke below that support, those key support levels you see on my chart, let's say it did break below the support levels here, I think it's more likely that any downside breakout could potentially be a false break. In other words, a bear trap. So for example, if, and I say if, XMI were to break down below support and below those key levels, again, below, for example, 2840, 2800, let's say it broke below all those levels, it's more likely we'll see a bounce back. So again, a potential false breakout. However, if it breaks all those support levels and it bounces back and then continues to drop again, if we see more follow through lower on XMI after the bounce back, then yes, that potentially could be an early warning sign of a bear market if it actually happens. However, guys, I consider that scenario to be less likely. I think it's more likely that any downside breakouts probably will end up being false breaks or bear traps, we shall see. And as I mentioned before, if it breaks to the upside, then that potentially could mean a bullish breakout, a major bullish breakout for the S&P and also the Dow as well. By the way, guys, before I finish, let me also mention that because there's a positive correlation between the stock markets and Bitcoin, I think it's quite likely that whatever happens on this chart of XMI, depending on which direction it breaks from, could have an impact on Bitcoin and crypto as well. So for example, if this pattern resolves itself to the upside, then potentially it could have a bullish impact, a major bullish impact on Bitcoin and crypto as well. However, if this pattern resolves itself to the downside, then it may put downward pressure on Bitcoin and crypto as well. So that's something to bear in mind as well. Again, I have to tell you that I don't know which direction it's going to break from. So as I've said before, let's just be patient and wait for confirmation of a breakout from which direction it wants to break from. Thank you very much indeed. Bye for now.